April 19th, 1995, Oklahoma City, downtown. Hello everybody, welcome to my episode. My name is Aiden Toole. Today, we're going to be diving into one of the most horrific and tragic domestic terrorist attacks to ever happen in the United States.
Quickly, CNN joins affiliate in Oklahoma City, KFOR, to bring you the latest that they're having live updates on this explosion that's happened at the federal court building in downtown Oklahoma City.
We are a block from where the blast occurred, and they are just treating people here on the side of the road about a block away.
We have heard reports that there is a daycare center in that building. We're looking at video of some of the victims.
We understand now that we are seeing some pictures of the arrival of some of the children who were in the daycare center located in that building.
Wednesday, April 19th, 1995. At approximately 9:02 a.m., a massive explosion rips through the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. The blast was so powerful that it damaged or destroyed over 300 surrounding buildings and even shattered glass across a 50-block radius. In 1995, this was the deadliest act of domestic terrorism on American soil in history. Although the target was the federal building, a daycare was also turned into rubble, leaving 19 children dead out of the 168 killed in the catastrophic event. Now that we've covered the loss, damages, and tragedy, this raises a question: who would do such a thing? So now let's move on to the suspects. On the day of the tragedy, when news broke about what happened, the initial assumption was that the attack was most likely carried out by foreign terrorists, since the 1993 World Trade Center bombing was only 2 years prior. But in the coming days, law enforcement started connecting the dots, because only an hour and a half after the bomb went off, an Oklahoma state trooper arrested a man for driving without license plates and carrying a concealed weapon. This arrest, which seemed normal at the time, would turn out to be all the evidence that the police needed.
While crews rushed to search for survivors like Amy Downs, 80 miles away, outside of Perry, a highway patrol trooper found himself in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Trooper Charlie Hanger is the man who caught the Oklahoma City bomber, though he didn't know it at the time. It started when he noticed this yellow Mercury without a license plate. During the traffic stop, he asked Timothy McVeigh to get out of the car and spotted what looked like a weapon under his jacket.
I had no idea that he had just committed the terrible act that he did. All I had was misdemeanor charges that were involved the weapon and no insurance and no proper license plate or tag on his vehicle.
McVeigh, along with his accomplice Terry Nichols, had been plotting the bombing for months. They were motivated by a mix of anti-government ideology, conspiracy theories, and rage over two specific events: the Ruby Ridge standoff in 1992 and the Waco siege in 1993. Both of these cases involved strong federal law enforcement and ended in deaths that became rallying cries in extremist circles. Further evidence of this is the date of the bombing. McVeigh purposely chose April 19th as it was the 2-year anniversary of the Waco siege. McVeigh was a 27-year-old Army veteran, ex-military, and in his view, he was acting towards a revolution for the country he loved. But in reality, he was an extremist and one of the worst domestic terrorists the United States has ever seen. Now, we'll dive into a timeline of the attack, starting at 6 a.m. Final preparations were completed, and McVeigh drives his Ryder truck, accompanied by Terry Nichols, and they make their way from Junction City, Kansas toward Oklahoma City, truck loaded with homemade explosives. 8 a.m. McVeigh and Nichols are downtown in Oklahoma City. He parks the truck a few blocks away from the target building and begins waiting for the right moment. 8:57 a.m. McVeigh drives the truck up to the north side of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building and parks it in a drop-off zone just outside the daycare and the offices. The next 5 minutes would be the last 5 minutes for so many victims who were killed in this horrible tragedy. 9:02 a.m., the bomb detonates. The explosion completely obliterates a third of the building, instantly killing and injuring hundreds. Debris, smoke, and flames fill the streets. Immediately, first responders rush to the scene. Firefighters, EMTs, and police begin searching for survivors. Brave civilians join in, pulling people from the wreckage, and hospitals begin preparations for mass casualties and injuries. At around 9:15 a.m., news begins to break nationally. People not just in the area, but across the country, are tuning in as investigators and news reporters actively cover the case. Shocking and graphic images live from the scene shock viewers across the world. It wasn't until days later that the magnitude of the catastrophe could truly be understood. About an hour after the bombing at 10:20 a.m., the FBI officially opens up their investigation on the case, which was notoriously named OKBOMB, or Oak Bomb. While these first responders and brave civilians were saving lives, 6 hours after the attack, at 3:15 p.m., McVeigh was apprehended. This previously mentioned traffic stop would go down as one of the most important and lucky arrests in U.S. history. The aftermath and trial. The investigation that followed this event was one of the largest in the FBI's history. Thousands and thousands of leads were tracked down, and the one thing that became very clear was that McVeigh and Nichols had acted almost entirely alone, with no support from a foreign terrorist network like the assumptions that had been made on the day of the attack. 2 years later, in 1997, McVeigh was convicted on 11 federal counts, including conspiracy and use of a weapon of mass destruction. 4 years later, in 2001, McVeigh was executed by lethal injection. McVeigh's death was the first federal execution in nearly 40 years, while his accomplice Terry Nichols was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The nation had to grapple with the realization that this wasn't an attack from abroad, it was homegrown terrorism. This violence was not from an outside enemy, but a man who was born and raised in the United States and even served in the military only years before he took so many American lives. The Oklahoma City bombing marked a turning point in how Americans think about terrorism. In response to this extremism, Congress passed the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, which expanded law enforcement powers and increased penalties for terrorist-related crimes. Responses to this event involved federal buildings tightening security, barriers were installed, and emergency response systems were overhauled. Overall, Americans became more alert to threats, not from just outside the borders, but from within. The term Oklahoma Standard was dubbed from the resilience and bravery demonstrated by the local Americans who were involved saving lives in this event. In regards to the memorials, the city has done a great job. If you are ever to visit the site of the bombing, you'll find the Oklahoma City National Memorial, a quiet but extremely powerful tribute to the victims and survivors, along with 168 empty chairs, one for each life lost. The smaller ones to represent the children who tragically passed away in this event. And finally, there's Survivor Tree, a resilient American elm tree that withstood the blast and now stands as a symbol of life, endurance, perseverance, and hope for the Americans. The Oklahoma City bombing was a moment of unbearable loss, but also it served as a wake-up call, a warning that extremism doesn't always come from abroad, and that the line between radical belief and violent action can be more thin than you think. As a country, we must watch for signs of radicalization to ensure that an event like this can never happen again in our country. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of my podcast. Rest in peace to the 168 lives lost, and may our country never face a domestic threat like this ever again.